The rain hammered against the cafe windows as Jasmine stirred her coffee with mechanical precision. She'd been coming to this corner cafe on Riverside Avenue for 3 years. Always ordering the same medium cappuccino, always sitting at the same table by the window. Her life had become a study in predictability. As a civil engineer, she spent her days designing bridges and buildings, creating structures meant to last forever. Yet her own life felt temporary, like she was constantly waiting for something real to begin. Her reflection stared back at her from the coffee cup's surface, tired eyes behind designer glasses, dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. At 32, she had the career she'd dreamed about, the apartment she'd saved for, the independence she'd fought hard to maintain. What she didn't have was someone to share it with. Her friends had stopped inviting her to couples' dinners months ago. Their pity was suffocating. She'd convinced herself that she was content alone, that relationships were distractions from the work that mattered. But deep down, in the hollow spaces of her heart, she knew she was lying. The cafe door burst open, and a man stumbled in, thoroughly drenched. Water cascaded from his charcoal coat, pooling on the hardwood floor. He shook his head like a dog, sending droplets flying in every direction. Jasmine found herself smiling despite herself. He looked absolutely ridiculous, and absolutely genuine in his soaking wet desperation. He approached the counter with an apologetic grin to the barista, water dripping from his dark hair. He had sharp features, but kind eyes. The sort of person who looked equally comfortable in a tuxedo, or soaking wet in a coffee shop. He ordered a black coffee in a voice that carried a slight accent she couldn't quite place. Something Eastern European, perhaps. Russian, maybe Czech. He paid with crumpled bills and turned to find a seat. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. In that moment, something shifted, not dramatically. Not like the novels she secretly read late at night when insomnia crept in. Just a small acknowledgement between two strangers. A recognition of shared humanity on an ordinary rainy day. He sat at the only available table, directly across from her. Not at her table, but close enough that she could hear him sip his coffee, close enough that when he pulled out a worn notebook and began sketching, she found herself curious about what he was drawing. She tried to focus on her work, tried to ignore the way her heart had accelerated at that brief eye contact, tried to convince herself that she wasn't interested. But her eyes kept drifting to his notebook. 30 minutes passed. She should have left. Instead, she watched him from behind her laptop screen. His sketches were architectural in nature, but with an artistic flair that suggested creativity rather than precision. Buildings that seemed to dance, structures that defied conventional logic. They were beautiful in their impossibility. One drawing showed a tower that spiraled upward, like DNA. Another depicted a bridge that seemed to float on air. They were the sketches of someone who dreamed without boundaries. Someone who hadn't yet learned to say, "That's impossible." "Excuse me?" he said suddenly, looking directly at her. His green eyes held a mixture of shyness and confidence that made her stomach flutter. "You keep looking at my drawings. You either think they're terrible, or you understand what I'm attempting. Which is it?" Jasmine's heart jumped into her throat. She wasn't prepared for directness. She'd spent so long behind professional walls, behind carefully maintained boundaries. "They're not terrible," she managed, closing her laptop and finding her voice. "They're impractical, but beautiful. Like you drew what you felt rather than what's possible." He smiled, and it transformed his entire face, crinkles appearing at the corners of his eyes. "Come here for a moment." He gestured to the empty chair at his table. She hesitated for only a second, before gathering her things and moving to his table. The rational part of her brain screamed warnings, reminders about stranger danger and the importance of caution. But another part, a part she'd buried deep for years, urged her to take the risk. He turned his notebook toward her, revealing page after page of impossible structures. Cathedrals with walls that seemed transparent, libraries that spiraled infinitely, parks suspended in clouds. "I'm an architect," he said, studying her face as she examined his work. "But architecture has become so constrained by safety regulations, budget limitations, the endless need for functionality. I come here to remember why I fell in love with this profession. To draw what my heart wants before my brain tells me it's impossible." He extended his hand. "I'm Viktor." "Jasmine," she replied, taking his hand. His grip was warm, solid, real. The touch sent electricity through her arm. And you're right. We do constrain ourselves. But those constraints exist because buildings need to not collapse. People need to be safe. Perhaps, he said, his eyes not leaving hers. Or perhaps we simply haven't learned to dream big enough yet. Perhaps we've forgotten that the most beautiful things in the world exist. Because someone was brave enough to try something that shouldn't work. They talked for hours. The rain outside continued its assault on the city, but inside the café, time became meaningless. Viktor told her about growing up in Prague, about his mother's passion for art, and his father's dedication to engineering. He spoke of how he'd tried to merge both worlds, often failing, always trying. He'd moved to this city 5 years ago, burying himself in work to escape the memory of a failed engagement. A relationship that had crumbled under the weight of his perfectionism and his inability to compromise. Jasmine found herself sharing things she rarely discussed. Her fear that she was running out of time to find love. Her secret desire to design buildings that weren't just functional, but transformative. Spaces that would change how people lived. The loneliness she felt despite her success. The way she'd constructed her life. Like one of her buildings, with every support beam carefully calculated. But somehow creating a structure that felt empty inside. When the cafe owner finally began closing at 9, neither wanted to leave. Viktor walked her to her apartment building, neither of them bothering with an umbrella, both getting soaked in the process. They talked even as they walked, words tumbling out as if they'd been waiting years to speak to each other. At her door, he kissed her forehead gently, a gesture so tender and respectful that it made her ache. "May I see you again?" he asked. The formality of the question, so different from modern dating culture, made her heart clench with something she couldn't name. "Yes," she whispered. "Please." That night, Jasmine lay in bed, unable to sleep, replaying their conversation, analyzing every word for hidden meaning. She'd been down this road before, had her heart broken by men who promised forever before disappearing into their own lives. But something about Viktor felt different. Something about the way he'd looked at her, like she was a blueprint he was trying to decode, made her believe that maybe this time could be different. She didn't know that in exactly 3 weeks, everything would change, that a single accident would rewrite their story in ways neither of them could have predicted, that the promise Viktor would make to her under the stars would become the most complicated promise to keep. All she knew was that for the first time in years, she felt alive. She felt seen. She felt like the beginning of something that might actually last. Viktor walked home in the rain, soaking wet and completely unconcerned. He climbed the 4 flights to his apartment and immediately began sketching. But instead of impossible buildings, he drew her. Her hands as she held her coffee cup. Her profile as she looked out at the rain. Her smile, still rare, but transformative when it appeared. By morning, he'd filled 20 pages. And he knew, without any doubt, that he was falling in love with Jasmine. 3 weeks passed, like a dream that neither of them wanted to wake from. Their second date had been at a gallery showing contemporary architecture, where Viktor explained his vision for sustainable design, while Jasmine challenged him with practical concerns. Instead of arguing, they'd found themselves collaborating, each strengthening the other's ideas. Their third date was dinner at his apartment, where he'd attempted to cook Czech dishes from his mother's recipes, and hilariously failed. They'd ended up ordering pizza and laughing until their sides hurt by the 4th date. They'd established a routine of coffee at their café, that sacred space where they'd first met. They'd begun sitting at the same table, the table that had belonged to neither of them, but had somehow become theirs. Viktor brought his sketches, Jasmine brought her work, but they spent more time talking than working. They played a game where one would describe a building, and the other would sketch it. They shared playlists, and discovered they had surprisingly similar taste in music. They talked about everything and nothing, words flowing between them like water finding its path. By the 8th day, they'd kissed for the first time. Not dramatically, not at some carefully planned moment, but spontaneously on a street corner after grabbing late-night food. His hand had cupped her face with surprising tenderness, and his lips had tasted like the baklava he'd been eating. She'd felt electricity shoot through her entire body, a sensation so intense that she'd gripped his jacket to steady herself. When they'd pulled apart, he'd rested his forehead against hers and whispered, "I've wanted to do that since I saw you in the cafe." By week 2, Jasmine had invited him to meet her parents. Her mother had taken one look at how Viktor held her hand and declared him a keeper. Her father had spent the evening asking him about his career ambitions, and by the end of the night, they were discussing engineering principles like old friends. Viktor had charmed both of them with his warmth and genuine interest in their lives. When they left, her mother had pulled her aside and said, "This one's different. I can see it in how he looks at you, like you're the most important blueprint in his life." By week 2.5, Viktor had taken her to his apartment's rooftop. He'd set up a small telescope and a blanket beneath the stars, and they'd lain there for hours, talking about dreams and fears. She'd told him about her insecurities, about the pressure she felt to prove herself in a male-dominated field, about the fear that she'd spent so much time building her career that she'd forgotten how to build a life. He'd listened without trying to fix it, without offering platitudes, just holding her and understanding. "I want you to know something," Viktor had said as they lay on the blanket, her head on his chest, his arm around her waist. "I've never been good at relationships. I've sabotaged relationships by being too focused on my work, too critical, too afraid of vulnerability. But with you, something is different. You make me want to be the man who can build something real, not just beautiful structures, but a life, a real life with another person." Jasmine had lifted her head to look at him, her eyes reflecting starlight. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I love you," Viktor had said simply, his voice steady and certain in a way that made her believe he meant every word. "I'm saying that I want to keep building this with you, no matter what comes. I promise you that, Jasmine. Whatever the future holds, I promise to face it with you." She'd kissed him then, long and deep, tasting the sincerity in every moment. "I love you too," she'd whispered against his lips. "I promise to." They'd held each other under the stars, to people who'd both given up on fairy tales, suddenly believing in them again. Neither of them could have known that the promise they were making would be tested in ways they couldn't imagine. Neither of them could have predicted that in less than a week. Their world would shatter and then slowly rebuild, stronger than before. But that night, under the stars, with her head on his chest and his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, they'd felt like they could survive anything. They'd felt invincible, connected by something deeper than attraction or convenience. They'd felt like they'd finally found the missing piece they'd both been searching for. The next morning, everything changed. Viktor had a meeting across town, just a routine consultation with a new client, something he'd done 100 times before. Jasmine was at her office, reviewing final designs for the bridge project that represented her life's work. She was preparing for a crucial presentation to the city council, and she'd been meticulous in her preparation. This project represented everything she'd worked for, a chance to prove that she could design structures that were both functionally perfect and aesthetically revolutionary. Her phone rang at 10:47 a.m. It was a hospital. Viktor had been in a car accident. He was conscious, but injured. He was asking for her. The world tilted on its axis. Jasmine's hands shook as she gathered her things. Her boss tried to speak to her about the presentation, but the words seemed to come from underwater. All she could focus on was getting to the hospital, on seeing Viktor, on confirming that he was alive and that everything she'd just begun to build wasn't about to crumble. The drive felt eternal. Every red light seemed like a personal insult. Every slow driver made her want to scream. She ran through worst-case scenarios in her mind, imagining surgeries and complications and outcomes she couldn't bear to consider. She'd spent her life creating structures meant to protect people, and in that moment, she realized how fragile everything was. All the engineering in the world couldn't prevent random accidents, couldn't protect the people you loved from the chaos of life. She found him in a private room, his left arm in a cast, bandages across his ribs, a cut on his forehead. But his eyes were alert, and when he saw her, relief washed across his face so intensely that she felt it in her chest. "I'm okay," he said immediately, seeing her panic. "The other driver ran a red light. My car took the impact, but the safety features worked. I'm bruised, fractured arm, some cracked ribs, but okay." She held his uninjured hand like it was the only thing anchoring her to reality. "You scared me," she whispered, tears streaming down her face now that she could finally allow herself to feel the fear she'd been holding back. "I know," he said, "but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The doctors kept him for observation. Jasmine stayed through the night, refusing to leave even when the nurses offered her a more comfortable waiting area. She sat in the chair beside his bed, watching him sleep, feeling the fragility of human existence in a way she never had before. All the structures she designed were meant to protect people, to keep them safe from natural disasters and structural failure. But in that moment, she understood that no architecture could truly protect against the randomness of life, the unexpected moments that could change everything. The next morning, Viktor's parents arrived from Prague. His mother, Alina, was a striking woman with kind eyes and Viktor's sharp features. His father, Dmitri, had the weathered face of someone who'd lived through difficult times and come out the other side stronger. They embraced their son carefully, mindful of his injuries, and then turned to Jasmine with an intensity that suggested Viktor had told them about her. "He loves you," Alina said simply, taking Jasmine's hands in hers. "I can see it in his face. In 3 weeks, this man has become more alive than he's been in years. Whatever this accident was, it happened for a reason. The universe was making sure you two had more time together." Jasmine wanted to believe that, wanted to think that fate had a plan. But all she could see was how fragile Viktor looked in the hospital bed, how the accident had stolen his sense of invulnerability. Over the next week, Viktor's recovery began in earnest. Physical therapy was painful and humbling. The fractured arm would take months to heal completely. The doctors warned him about pushing too hard, about the risk of permanent nerve damage if he wasn't careful. For an architect whose hands were his primary tool, whose hands did the work his heart demanded, the prospect was terrifying. One evening, after his parents had returned to Prague, Viktor broke down. Jasmine found him staring out the hospital window, tears streaming down his face like rain on glass. "What if I can't draw anymore?" he asked, his voice hollow and small, like a child's. "What if this injury has taken that from me? My hands are how I create, Jasmine. Without them, I'm just another engineer following rules. I'm not the man you fell in love with." Jasmine held him, understanding that this wasn't just about physical capability. This was about identity, about the fundamental way Viktor understood himself and his place in the world. She understood that fear because she felt it too. The fear that he might be right, that the damage might be permanent. "You will," she said firmly, holding his face in her hands and forcing him to look at her. "I know you will. Your hands are stronger than this. Your spirit is stronger than this. But even if you couldn't, even if the worst happened, you would still be the man I love. You'd still be Viktor. Your hands don't make you who you are." "How can you be so sure?" he asked, his eyes searching hers for the certainty he'd lost. "Because I've watched you this past month," she said, her voice steady, despite her own fears. "I've seen how you approach life, how you dream bigger than anyone I've ever met, how you inspire me to be braver in my own work. That comes from your mind and your heart, not just your hands. Your hands are just the tools. They're beautiful and important, but they're not what makes you Viktor." He held her close, and she felt him relax slightly, but neither of them could shake the underlying fear. Life had suddenly become uncertain again, and all the promises they'd made under the stars seemed fragile in the face of concrete reality. 2 weeks later, Viktor was released from the hospital. His arm was still in a cast, but the swelling had reduced, and his doctors were cautiously optimistic about his recovery. They recommended physical therapy, warned him about overdoing it, told him that recovery would take time and patience. Jasmine had taken time off work to care for him. Though she attended her crucial presentation to the city council via video conference from his apartment, giving the speech from his bedroom while he watched from the adjacent room, she presented her bridge design with passion, explaining not just the technical specifications, but the vision behind it, how it would connect neighborhoods that had been separated for decades by geographical and economic barriers, how it would be beautiful enough to inspire, but functional enough to serve safely, how it represented not just engineering but hope. The council loved it. They approved her design unanimously, and when she'd finished the presentation, Viktor had wheeled himself into the room and kissed her, celebrating her achievement as if it were his own that night. She told him about the approval, and he held her, genuinely thrilled despite his own struggles. They sat on his couch, and he asked her something that made her heart stop. "Move in with me," he said. "Not because of the accident, not because I need help, Because I want to build something with you. A real life. Not just moments together. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to rebuild my dreams with you, by my side. She said yes before he'd finished asking, already imagining a future that extended beyond the hospital visits and recovery time. They decided to find a new apartment together, a space that belonged to both of them rather than to either of their separate lives. It was a fresh start, a symbol of their commitment to building something new. Physical therapy was brutal. Viktor's arm had to be slowly strengthened, carefully stretched, gradually pushed back to its normal range of motion. There were days when he wanted to quit, when the pain seemed too much and the progress too slow. Jasmine was there through all of it. She learned the exercises from the physical therapist and helped him at home, counting out repetitions, encouraging him when he wanted to give up. She watched him wince with pain, watched him push through it, watched him slowly regain strength. The first time he successfully held a pencil 3 weeks into recovery, they both cried. It was just a simple pencil, just the ability to grip it and not drop it, but it meant the world. He sketched a simple line, and then another, and then he was drawing again, slowly and carefully, but drawing nonetheless. His hands were shakier than before. His lines less confident, but they were his lines. The product of his mind and his hands working together. By week 4, he was back at his firm for a few hours a day, working on designs under supervision. By week 6, he was back to work full-time, though he moved more carefully. Treated his arm with respect, acknowledged its limitations while celebrating its strength. His colleagues welcomed him back like a family member, and his boss assured him that they'd hold his position for as long as he needed. Jasmine's bridge project was breaking ground. She stood at the site, watching construction equipment arrive, watching workers prepare the foundation. She thought about Viktor's words that first day in the café, about dreaming big enough. Her bridge was a dream made concrete, a structure that would stand for generations. And it existed partly because Viktor had reminded her that the most beautiful things in the world exist because someone was brave enough to try something that shouldn't work. 3 months after the accident, they signed the lease on their new apartment. It was a loft in a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and soaring ceilings. They painted one wall with chalkboard paint and turned it into their collaborative design space. Viktor would sketch his impossible dreams, and Jasmine would redline them with practical considerations. Together they created something that existed in the space between dream and reality. One evening, as they worked together on the loft's transformation, adding shelves and hanging pictures, Viktor suddenly stopped and looked at her with an intensity that made her heart quicken. "I've been thinking about our lives," he said, setting down his tools, "about what we want them to become. Jasmine, I want to marry you. Not because of the accident or because of time, but because you make me want to be brave. You make me want to build things that matter." She was already nodding before he'd finished, already feeling tears on her cheeks. He pulled out a ring, a delicate band with a stone that caught the light. And when he slid it on her finger, it felt like a promise being renewed, stronger than the first one, tested by hardship and proven true. The wedding was small and intimate, held at the site of the bridge project that had brought them together in a way neither had planned. Family and close friends gathered as the sun set, painting the half-constructed bridge in shades of gold and crimson. Jasmine wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit perfectly, with embroidered details that caught the light like starlight. Viktor wore a suit with a pocket square that matched the color of her eyes, his left arm strong and unbandaged now, fully healed and ready to support her as they walked through life together. They wrote their own vows, speaking not of perfect forever, but of committed now, of choosing each other through challenges and triumphs, through pain and joy, through the beautiful ordinariness of building a life together. "I promise," Jasmine said, her voice steady despite her tears, "to keep dreaming with you, to help you build the impossible structures that live in your heart, to be there when your arm hurts, when you doubt yourself, when you need someone to believe in you. I promise to keep choosing you every single day, even when it's hard. I promise to be the foundation that supports your dreams, just as you're the inspiration that helps me reach higher." "I promise," Viktor said, moving closer to take both her hands, "to be the man who appreciates your strength, who celebrates your victories, who holds you when you're afraid. I promise to keep inspiring you to be braver, to keep you believing in dreams." I promise to face whatever life brings us. Because with you, I know I can face anything. I promise to love not just the successful engineer, but the woman who fears she's not enough, and to remind you every day that you are." They kissed as their families applauded, and in that moment, they both understood something fundamental. The accident that had terrified them, that had threatened to take everything they'd just begun to build, had actually strengthened their foundation. It had proven that they could survive difficulties together. It had taught them that real love isn't about avoiding pain, but about choosing to walk through it hand in hand. They honeymooned in Prague, walking the streets where Viktor had grown up, visiting the places that had shaped him. They climbed to the top of Prague Castle and looked out over the city, holding hands and talking about their future. They visited his parents' home, where Alina had prepared traditional Czech meals, and his father had shown them old photographs, stories from a life lived with purpose and meaning. 1 year after the accident, Jasmine stood in front of the completed bridge, her professional team beside her. The structure was magnificent, exceeding every technical specification and aesthetic expectation. The bridge seemed to dance across the gap it spanned, beautiful and functional, dreaming and practical all at once. The mayor had invited her to give a speech at the inauguration ceremony, to explain her vision to the thousands of people who'd gathered to celebrate. She looked out at the crowd and saw Viktor standing with his camera, capturing the moment, his arms strong and capable around it. Their eyes met, and he smiled that smile that still made her heart flip. Even after all this time, even after everything they'd been through. "This bridge," she began, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd, was designed with precision and care. But more than that, it was designed with hope. Hope that structures we build, whether they're bridges, or relationships, or lives, matter. That they connect people and places. That they create possibilities where none existed before. I want to thank the person who showed me that the most beautiful structures are those built with love. That the best designs are the ones where strength and beauty work together, where practical engineering and impossible dreams create something real. She was looking at Viktor, and he knew. The crowd followed her gaze, and some of them began to applaud, sensing the story beneath the words. Later that night, at the celebration dinner, held in a historic building overlooking the newly completed bridge, Viktor pulled Jasmine aside to a quiet balcony. The structure seemed to glow against the night sky, a testament to human ingenuity and determination. A bridge that Viktor had inspired her to build just a little braver, just a little more beautifully. "I have something for you," he said, handing her a notebook. It was filled with sketches, but these were different from his earlier work. These were designs for buildings, spaces, structures that all seemed connected to her life. Their apartment building reimagined, with multiple units for family members. A community center that resembled her original vision of a bridge. A home, sketched in beautiful detail, with a nursery and a studio where they could both create. "What is this?" she asked, though she thought she knew. "Our future," he said simply. "If you want it. I'm proposing that we design it together. Not just as a couple, but as collaborators. I want to build things with you, Jasmine. Real things. Possible things. A home, a family, a life that's both beautiful and functional. I want to fill that nursery with our children. I want to build a studio where we can work side by side. I want to spend my life creating with you." She kissed him then, tasting the promise in his words, the commitment in his intention. They'd survived the accident that could have broken them. They'd learned that forever wasn't about perfect moments or romantic gestures. Forever was about choosing each other through the difficult days. About building something together that could withstand any storm. 2 years later, their daughter was born on a spring morning. She had Viktor's green eyes and Jasmine's analytical expression. And they named her Grace, because that's what her existence represented, a gift, an unexpected miracle. A continuation of the love that had been forged in a café and tested by accident and proven unbreakable as they stood in the nursery they'd designed together. Watching their daughter sleep, Viktor and Jasmine understood the truth that had taken them time to learn. Real love wasn't about promises made under stars or grand romantic gestures. Real love was the daily choice to keep building, keep improving, keep choosing each other. Even when the structure grew complicated and required effort to maintain. They would face challenges ahead. Viktor's arm would continue to give him trouble on rainy days. Jasmine's career would demand sacrifices. There would be disagreements and misunderstandings, and moments of doubt. There would be sleepless nights with a crying baby and financial worries, and the thousand small stresses that come with building a shared life. But they would face it all together. Two architects of their own destiny, constantly redesigning, constantly improving, constantly choosing the person beside them. They'd learned that true love wasn't about a single perfect night or a dramatic rescue. It was about the 1,000 ordinary mornings, built moment by moment, choice by choice, day by day. That was the promise that mattered. Not forever in one perfect night, but forever in every day. In the careful way Viktor held her after a difficult surgery. In how Jasmine stayed up late helping Viktor work through a problematic design. In the way they looked at each other across a room full of people and smiled, knowing exactly what the other was thinking. In the commitment to continue, no matter what. Years later, when people asked about their love story, Harrison and Jasmine would exchange a knowing look. That same look they'd shared in that hospital room. Yes, it had begun with passion. Yes, there had been fear and obstacles. But real love, they understood now, was the choice to show up, day after day, through health and sickness. In passion, and in partnership, they had found each other in a bar by chance. But they had chosen each other every single day after. That's what made their story extraordinary. Not the beginning, but the commitment to continue. Not the accident, but the choice to rebuild stronger. Not the promises made under stars, but the promises kept through ordinary days and shared struggles and the beautiful, imperfect reality of building a life together. And as they stood on the balcony of their home, overlooking the bridge that had brought them together and the city that had witnessed their love grow, they understood that the greatest structures in the world aren't made of steel and concrete. They're made of two people choosing to love each other, completely and imperfectly, day after day, year after year, forever.